Hello, and welcome to The Value of Everything. So, we are going to explore a very, important, fundamental thing about our society, about our success, about, everything sort of relies around our survival. Everything is innate to our intelligence, and it is the main reason why we are the top dogs in this on this planet. So IQ is usually a very good determining measure of your abilities, your mental ability, and the way in which you will be successful in life. IQ is a lot about pattern recognition, a little bit about logic and deduction. There's a number of little tests. I'm sure everybody's been IQ'd test at some point in time. And it's kind of interesting how it's not necessarily the main driver or point in life as to as the main measure as to what your competence is to go into the workforce. It's usually to do with the qualifications, which in some ways is sort of is a fairly good measure that you can study and you can recite things and put them down back on paper, but maybe still not quite the same as being able to think on your feet, be able to recognize patterns, see the future, predict things, and all that other side of intelligence. But what I want to do today is I just get a little bit, sometimes I just feel a little bit queasy when it seems like you get a lot of information about IQ, and that's being the main determinant factor of your success, of all these kind of things. And I just want to take a few little criticisms of, just tackle IQ and state that it's not quite everything, the be-all and end-all of humanity's future success. It's not like say in today's modern era, we all have to focus on finding rich and successful celebrity people. I wouldn't say necessarily that's the key driver of ourselves at the moment. We really are not going to pursue anything great if we all turn into these fantastic celebrities that always are attracted to wealth, or we'll all just create this big pyramid and have these kings and queens and celebrate these aristocracy people, and it wouldn't really bring us to any great end. But also at the same time, you could say that if you didn't have a few of these highly intelligent people that were able to invent things and to pursue certain types of excellence, it's only the handful of these amazing ideas that do actually change our world. And you could only imagine that if we lived still in this world, that there wasn't these few bright sparks in the world that didn't create electricity, that didn't create the combustion engine, that didn't create mobile cellular phones, we would be quite hampered. And or even the atomic bomb, which is another thing which created mutually assured destruction, which prevented any other further large-scale wars. So it's very interesting. But then I want to suggest that there is a certain mix of humanity, and I don't want us to feel like we're all just pursuing this thing in life where we need to just be highly intelligent beings with no emotions and just all focusing on inventing things and nothing else without looking at the whole picture. Now, the one thing that I will always push forward is the virtue side as well. And virtue has certain things which interconnect with intelligence, potentially. I don't even think that this is really a fundamental thing of intelligence, but curiosity and is it industrialistness, and I guess a little bit of systematizing. Yeah, I guess that is a little bit more on the lines of intelligence, maybe even to a certain extent bravery, a way of mastering one's mind, or a way of keeping oneself, holding ourselves down and preventing ourselves for a little while before we go forward and consume later. So, sorry, jumbling my words a little bit there. So, rather than it's like instant gratification, basically. So, consuming later instead of in the now. So, I just want to bring things a little bit back. So, in the whole grand scheme of things, we have, let's just say if you had a friend, would you rather a highly intelligent friend or a very virtuous friend, but was missing just a few little things in terms of the intelligence side of things? Now, I would say, on my personal opinion, I would prefer. I think there's two very interesting aspects. Obviously, if somebody's highly intelligent and I'm trying to have a conversation with them, but they've got no real social character, anything like that, I think there's something a little bit missing in that world. And they're missing all the they're pretty much hitting very low on all the other virtues, but are still very high in intelligence. I don't think I would really enjoy the company of that person. I don't think they would have anything in terms of any reason for what I would like to be with that person. And I mean, I guess I've got a slightly high IQ, but even so, I think I know that I've been around people. You know, when you hang around with your grandparents, I know that grandparents or your the elderly usually have a slightly lower IQ than the younger years and stuff like that. But I have a really enjoyous time spending time with people like that. I find them interesting. I find anybody who's got like a certain level of kindness very nice to be around. And yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong with not having like extreme aptitude, but just being a very pleasant person and having all the as many virtues as they possibly can in terms of what they can provide to being a good person. Now, I think that is the overriding factor in life, and if you would want to have a friend, you'd rather have a friend who might not be up there with the intelligence side of things, but you would have loyalty and you would have certain levels of kindness and dedication, like person that would stand up for you, that person that would always watch your back. You would prefer that person over the intelligent person. Now, maybe if you would fancy an intellectual discussion about some quantum mechanics or something crazy like that, that's really theoretical, you're probably not going to have that conversation, which it might be a little bit of a shame, but hey, look at me. I'm continuously having these strange, very theoretical conversations by myself, and I seem to not be too lost in the world of being on my own or anything like that with this conversation. I know people were going to come back to me with questions eventually, but there's still an open world out there, and there's still people that's going to converse on an intellectual level with me at some point in time. So it's not like even if I did surround myself with people with low IQ, but if they did have virtues in other realms which were in bucket loads, then they would still be. I would still think that would be a very pleasant thing to have. Really, I think I would feel a lot better in the company of those other people. I always remember a certain situation where, no, it's not that they're probably, it's not that they've got low intelligence or anything like that, but I do know certain situations where I've been in a grouping and there's not much in the way of like, everyone's a little bit timid, everyone's a little bit quiet and not self-assured, and they just feel a little bit embarrassed of the situation. Now, in that scenario, I found that a lot of people that are usually a little bit on the shy side, they generally are, if you crack them open, they are very nice and kind and genuine people, but they're always self-studying, they're always self-criticizing themselves and things like that. But when I find myself in the grouping of that scenario, and I'm sort of, it's not really the word of dictating, but I'm just sort of, I'm setting along sort of the conversation points, and I'm trying to open up other people, and I'm trying to get other people involved in the conversation. I think we've all been sitting around, and it's been a really enjoyable discussion where we've all thoroughly enjoyed it, and we've all had a participation level of what's going on. And it's been fantastic. And then when you look at and I've known situations where I've stood around sort of intelligent people that have been a little bit arsey and things like that, and they think they know a lot, and it's just been a bit of a weird little. There's a little bit of a weird backhand social play which is going on in the background, and I can sort of see what's happening, and people are just closing up, and sometimes, yeah, you can get that sort of weird scenario around people that doesn't open up people. Now, all to say as well that when I go back to that point of where I'm sort of being the narrator of the group, or just keeping the conversation or the subject matter going and getting people involved, it seems like in that scenario or that grouping that I'm sort of thriving, and there is good people, there's good virtuous people, and there's people with intelligence which are pushing together great ideas, great conversations, which are spinning around much better than in comparison to a social grouping of intellectuals that have got a little bit less in the way of virtues, and they're just a little bit more egotistical, and there isn't much of a genuine sort of push forward in the way of ideas. There isn't much of an expansion, and it's a little bit more about one-upmanship against each other. So yeah, you can see that in this social grouping, this social activity, that you could find yourself, you might find that there's one guy there and there's a lot of other guys. There's one guy that's got like 110 in IQ and the rest are about 90, but they can all agree on good senses. They've got a good virtue base around them. They're being very kind and genuine with each other. And they can come up with good reasoned ideas as much as they possibly can. Now, then you could have a lot of men with like IQs well into the 130s and higher, but they potentially might not have the ability to converse, have good arguments. Maybe there's a methodology of where they're all trying to dominate each other, and they're not actually coming up with a solution. So you'd find that the grouping with the lower IQ has got more sense of direction, maybe because one person can pick up and be the focal point, the manager point, and people can work around that. And then on the highly intelligent grouping, then you may not have quite the counterbalance and the roles or the workings of just a good work ethic sort of group or conversing group. So yeah, let me just now obviously there is such a thing as intelligent people that can communicate and are virtuous and all of those things at the same time. I'm not denying that once you're intellectual that you have to be an arsehole, but it's just one of those sort of I just want to just try and dig at a few little scenarios and a few little ideas, which doesn't sort of I just don't want I just want to just criticize and just isolate the IQ thing as not to be the full overdriver of what determines humanity's success. Now, let's say another little situation, I think I mentioned this before in another podcast, is that say if you go to, if you join a classroom let's say if you're a kid and you join a school and you're in a class, if you are the oldest in that class, there is a lot more of an indication that you're going to be more highly successful in your later lives, because you have got the extra growth in sort of the brain development as well as the physical growth development, which gives you this little bit more of a dominating factor, or this little bit of confidence over your peers. So I don't know how I'm weaving this into the argument, but I guess this is a perspective of that you can be quite clouded out, you can be quite shut down if you are put into an environment of highly intelligent people, and you seem to be the one thing that is, I guess you're a small fish in a big pond rather than being a big fish in a large pond sort of scenario. So there's less of a chance for you to flourish, and there's, I guess, I mean, say if you looked at tennis players, I guess when they started off, they had to probably be better than their peers, and that gave them that confidence booster. And then gradually as time got on, they found that they were being a bit more physically stronger, and they could beat a lot of other opponents, and they would just level up. Eventually they would get to the point in which they would compete against the pros of the world in terms of tennis. But for the meantime, they would have to get to a point of accomplishing people that were a little less subservient to them. So I guess there is, I don't know, this sounds like a bloody survival of the fittest Darwinian sort of theory, but there is a certain level of understanding and knowing how you can accomplish things over certain peers, and you can win certain things. You can win a chess game. You can do these kind of things that you know that there's certain gifts that you have, and you can isolate these skills and strive even further. So us all being these highly intelligent people, if you have a scenario where we're all highly intelligent, and then maybe you might just have one just a little bit more highly intelligent than the other, you could have a disastrous effect of depressing all these other highly intelligent people in comparison to this one slightly higher intelligent people than everybody else. Thus, if you look at a grouping of other people where you have slightly less intelligent people, but there is a virtue element which is in the mix, where people are kind, generous, they are being very knowledgeable, they're being entertaining of ideas. You think of the old philosophical men all standing around, sharing all these ideas, questioning and deducing arguments with each other. These guys probably have to be very friendly. They have to be all like very nice, and they're all trying to they're playing mind games with each other all the time. But they're probably doing it in a very friendly manner. They're trying to do geometry, all these kind of interesting things with each other. And the overriding factor here is that none of that could happen if they were all just highly intelligent people without any virtue. They would all have to have a certain degree of working together, working in a good social pact to float these ideas off each other. So, all right. So, I mean, obviously, I'm accomplishing my point here, is to say that you can't just have IQ and nothing else. You do need to have a few more strings to your bow. But another thing, obviously, you could say that, well, even the argument would be, if you had the intelligence, you can obviously learn. So you can recognize the pattern that you're failing in, not being able to get friends. So you would have to try out certain things like smiling back at your friends, or smiling back at people, or being generous with them, and yada, 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 until you can accomplish a certain level of friendship. And then you've got people that you can work with. And in those sense. Now, let's go back to the another point I would like to make of how people are basically selfish. So I think that's a fairly good argument. If you look at people in general, everyone lives in their own body, they're in their own being, and really it would just be illogical to say that we're not self-interested. You could say, oh yeah, I work for the needs of others and stuff like that, but there has to be some self-motive for you to do this kind of stuff, regardless of whether it's in the now or in the future, where you look back at the work that you've done. You probably might not like the work that you do at the moment for the other people, but then you look into the future, you look into do all these kind of things. So it's very interesting in that respect of mentioning that people work in a self-interested need. So, what's the point I was trying to get at? What was the point? Apologies here. Just had a very bad night's sleep last night, so it's just racking on my head. If somebody is so self-interested... Oh yeah, so it's to do with intelligence and self-interest, and if you... Oh yeah, so, okay, so this is just the thing about virtue in general. So if you're so self-interested, you do need to just, and to really push forward your cause as much as possible, and to really enjoy the fruits of humanity and being a human being, and reproducing and having a life and friends and things that really make you happy, you do need to pursue virtue. If you was born innately intelligent and didn't pursue virtue, obviously I would question whether you really had the right type of intelligence in the first place, or maybe you wasn't surrounded by the correct people that guided you into the right sphere. Now that's obviously another point I would like to make as well. But yeah, if people are really should be pursuing virtue as their primary goal, and again, byproducts of the virtue is intelligence, in the respect of that you do have to delay gratification in a lot of the virtues that you do. So for every single one, there is a certain mind manipulation that you have to pursue on yourself to obtain a certain goal. So, and that does even account to bravery, where you have to manipulate your mind to do a brave act. So maybe even close your mind and do the act that you don't really want to do, and then you can sort of open the mind a little bit later and think about what you did, and think, oh my god, I did that brave act. My gosh, at least I did it at the time, but I would think back about it now, I don't know how I did it. So every virtue that you do, you don't really want to do it, or there is sort of a thing, but you know that there's a long-term goal, there's a long-term interest in things. I know some virtues come a little bit easier. They're so intertwined and programmed into us. But from a kid, not necessarily they are sort of that obvious. So kindness comes pretty easy. Like for most people nowadays, you can say please and thank you to everybody. It just comes on autopilot. There isn't really any effort whatsoever. It's just a measure that's all automatically there. However, there must have been a certain level of your parents talking to you in certain ways, and practice and repetition, until you had mastered a certain level of a method of talking to people in a kind way. Generosity isn't necessarily is a tricky one to overcome. Sometimes I know I mentioned in previous podcast, I know somebody that really have struggled with generosity, but they overcome it and mastered it eventually. It's an interesting sort of concept where you look at all the virtues, and it is a mastery of one's brain and how you can manipulate your brain in a certain manner to obtain your own, for the motive of your own self-interest, but it does interest other people in the same respect. As to like I like to mention in like a school of fish, sometimes a school of fish can have predators running straight at it, and there's certain types of species of fish that will have these fish that jump straight forward into the predators, like almost right in the predator's way, or distract the predators to keep the school of fish out of attack. Even so, those brave fish, or the few brave fish that get manage to do that, end up reproducing, and it's an innate thing which is spread on into the gene pool of those fish. Okay, so there was another point. So that's that element of self-interest and intelligence. And it's interesting if you just was born ridiculously intelligent, but you just didn't have any of those the major point of just going, right, maybe I require a little bit of virtue to just unlock or unleash this intelligence perspective. And then you would know how to, then there'll be so many different areas and ways in which you could really spread the branches or the roots of this intellectual mind. Now, there's another element of this, obviously, is how you're nurtured throughout your life. So I know pretty much that I had a very wandering mind. I had a mind that I was always thinking. I was quite a shy, quiet kid, looking at people talking and discussing, but always reviewing the way that they were talking. And I would find it quite embarrassing that if the attention was focused on me, but I was just always self-studying, self-critical. I was thinking about the world a lot of the times and how things were working, and I remember just studying things, looking at things. I remember just staring out windows, whatever I was doing. I was just, you would say, sort of thing like a daydreaming kind of kid. Now, that's interesting. That's like a wandering sort of mind thing, which is not focused on the system of education as much, and really wants to branch out into their own sphere and think about things that they want to think about. But the nurturing system that I was surrounded by was like a school curriculum that was dedicated to learning in particular ways and manners, which wasn't really into my sphere of learning. And they were trying to put me into which they do to everybody else. They tried to squeeze everybody into a square cube. But some people are spheres, some people are oblongs. Who knows what everybody are? But we're not necessarily just this same mold which we could be all pressed into. And if we weren't taught one of the important things about virtues and knowing that the biggest thing about really intelligence and everything else is the curiosity factor, that if we weren't curious of life and we weren't asking questions, but we was told answers all the time, then it really it does frazzle down the wandering mind into this sort of oblique abyss of unknowing and really sort of depression to a certain extent. So if we were given tools of deduction or induction and really were told about the stories of Socrates and how he would question people about their legitimacy in their lives, obviously a teacher wouldn't really like to do that because then they would be questioned of their legitimacy. But it would be a fantastic thing. It would be a very interesting thing, and it would spark minds of curiosity in this world. Now, some people in this world are very fortunate to be taught this stuff from a very early age. Some people are not really taught this stuff from an early age and really just go through a world where they are fairly impulsive and they're living day to day and they've got to make do with what they've got and just try and struggle through it without anybody giving them too much of a guiding light or anything to work with. So here comes to the point of, if this child or a child was nurtured to a certain degree with very good logical steps and understandings, I guess you could say that there are genetically some qualities which will get minds working in certain ways, and there are genetic qualities that will get other minds working in certain ways. There are things like defects. There are things that prevent brains from working in certain ways. I know that I was diagnosed with dyslexia. But really, I found ways of thinking around systems, and in some ways, it's just the way that I think now, I think is a bit more of an advantage today in comparison to being highly focused and analytical. So, this IQ thing as well is obviously a model based upon, I guess you get pattern recognitions, which is very important, but there is an analyzing aspect as well. And I've made a certain points in Chinese eugenics regarding this, about how IQ and the devotion just to be creating some high IQ being beyond everything else is not necessarily the major advantage in this world. And I think I've gone over a few points about different terms of intelligence. So yeah, going back to the intelligence side of things, or the IQ side of things, I think there's certain things in which intelligence and curiosity can flourish, and the only way that it can be really ignited is by the pooling of virtue itself. So if you was born innately, I guess you get these kind of people which have certain diseases, or I don't know, it's a genetic defects which like Aspergers disease or syndrome, and it gives them probably a heightened amount of intelligence, but not too much else. But they probably are very inventful. They can come up with ideas. They're probably incredible mathematicians, and there is certain applicable things that can happen. Now, imagine if we did have just purely that side of the world, where we just had these incredibly intelligent Aspergers people, but not with much of a social structure to them, not too much of emotional intelligence, and beyond that, we just had these people in the world. I don't think that would be maybe there could be some incredible inventions that would be made in this world, but it wouldn't make a very pleasant world. And let's go back to these old philosophers that are standing around. I would say that probably what made them so happy, or made them so great, was probably not necessarily the fact of all this intellectual talking and stuff like that, but it was just this joining together where they would all come together and they would all have a nice long chat about things, and they could really explore their minds and their virtue. And it was probably a fairly, I don't know, maybe slightly confrontational, maybe competitive, but still a friendly way in which they can socialize and gather around and think about ideas about the world, and really be on the forefront of ideas rather than being this person who's just being told a lot of information. So it's really the surroundings of virtue, this world in which we are struck by, like this, the beauty, the curiosity, this understanding of things. I know that obviously I've mentioned this quote before, but Albert Einstein said that he wasn't really gifted with any kind of special talent or gift. It was really just an act of curiosity that just stoked him from going from one pursuit to another, which is it is interesting in that respect. Now, I just want to make a counteract to that point. So, let's say in some examples, I guess some people were good at art, some people were not good at art. I was fairly okay at art. I was probably one of the better students at school. So, I guess it was just like a pure creative aspect to things. So it was somewhere that I could actually enjoy and explore ideas in comparison to be told ideas. That's probably why I enjoyed that element to life. But you look at the careers and the career goals, and being an artist isn't really isn't going to be the one thing that's going to really give you too much of the coin. So I dissuaded away from that level and pursued other areas. Now, I'd just like to think in terms that there was certain things from when I was a very young child that I used to like drawing. And I guess I spent a lot of time drawing when I was a kid, and I would take a lot of time focusing. I remember going around to my nan's and there wasn't much to do, so I would draw there. So let's say, for example, that maybe I wasn't that great, but then I just gradually just spent a lot more time than probably other kids at doing that task until I eventually came to a point in which I was fairly accomplished at that. Now that could be a fair point in which that repetition has just made me very good at art, but then I somehow think when I'm in school that I'm fairly talented compared to my peers. Same thing probably applies to a footballer, where I was a pretty crap footballer at school. There were some very fantastic kids. They probably had spent a lot of time in the gardens just playing football, and then when they play on a competitive arena against me, they notice that they're incredibly a few levels above me, and they can rip me apart. Now it comes to the point as well. What other things which I found that I was fairly good at? So I had things like. What was the other things? Yeah, if I look at my intelligence and I look at how things were sculpted around that, there's some very interesting elements. So I guess I'm fairly good in social situations compared to a lot of peers. And it would seem that I had, obviously what I mentioned a little bit earlier, I had been studying people around me for quite an incredible amount of time. And I had like a fairly good role model of my father, who I was looking at a lot of times. He was the person who was carrying the narration of the points. He was keeping the fun going in the social situations. I noticed the way that he would ask questions and things like that. So I've really been studying people for a very long time, seeing what they work, without being the person that would speak in those environments. So I have been studying that situation for a long time before I started to try to do it myself and go into that realm. So it's kind of interesting how I would think to myself, okay, I'm fairly good and accomplished at that. It's not necessarily innate. It's something that I've probably been looking at for a long time and studying and wondering about. I guess you could have people that are just very naturally chatty people and things like that, but having a fairly good narration and a fairly good sort of topic of discussion might be just a little bit different, and might mean a little bit more of a different way of thinking. Now, what other little talents? Now, I guess I've been surrounded by computers a lot of my life. I've had PCs and the internet from very early ages, and I've rebuilt computers. I know it's nothing really that special nowadays. Most people can probably do it. But I'm fairly, whenever I'm given a task or anything that's based on the computer, I can really master it to a fairly good degree. And I know like a few DOS commands, things like that. I remember when the first days you had to pretty much phone technical support most of the time, so I'm fairly good on the phone as well. And all of these things that I noticed that I'm fairly good at now has all been really things that I've just been quite used to in the past, and it's just really come into fruition throughout my adulthood. And these are certain skills and adaptations that I've had which have been really handy for me in the future. Now, when I look back at these things, it's kind of interesting. But the one thing which I would say is a little bit harder to determine compared to other things is my curiosity. There is certain questions which I ask, which I'm put into a room and I start asking questions that I don't know. I just don't think other people would necessarily do as much. I look at some people when they're browsing on their mobile and they're looking at their Facebook, or they're looking at what other people are doing, or celebrities, or they're shopping. But I don't see much of people like going on Wikipedia. I know obviously people do go on Wikipedia and ask questions and things like that, but it's not like one of those things that's always done. And a lot of people just think that as soon as they get out of schooling or university, that's pretty much them done in terms of their intellectual pursuits. So, and that really didn't stop with me. So it's kind of, is that a situation of the environment that I lived in? I guess my father was a very good little knowledgeable man. He knew when there was quizzes, he would be excellent at them usually. So maybe it was a certain element of role models there, which was sparking my curiosity. There was an element of where I'm watching over somebody else that has this knowledge, and then maybe I try to aspire to be that person. So we could say that maybe even intelligence is being surrounded by inspirational characters that give us this innate thing of intelligence and wanting to be that person. So it's fairly interesting. It's very interesting how we accomplish this point of intelligence. And intelligence might not necessarily be this scenario of this, what you're born with, that this is fantastic. Now, I always find that I've been doing a lot of researches of like very influential people in the past. And another thing that I always tend to find is that the situation of when a child is like fairly young, they want to play outside all the time. This is like, I don't know, 1800s, 1900s, whenever. They always want to play outside all the time. But you find a lot of these situations happen. I think even like Charles Dickens, H.G. Wells, you name it. Pretty. I think even George Orwell. You look at all these influential sparks that have happened in the past. They've had some kind of bad illness or been maimed, and there's been a situation where they've just got nothing to do other than read books and study and learn and just get taken away with great ideas. Now, that's fairly interesting. So that little unlocking of the mind in which you are now in a certain discipline because you've got no other option is a fascinating thing, and it does give us a certain amount of dedication and understanding. And once the mind is sparked in book reading and you cannot stop this voracious way of just continuously studying, then it becomes innate in that person until it becomes like people think, okay, this person's incredibly knowledgeable, they must be innately intelligent. So yeah, I always look at things in just I know that there are certain things, there are mental things that people get prevented by and things like that, but I also say in terms of intelligence, whenever I've been sort of put on the spot or asked a question, I know that my mind just freezes and it just shuts down and I can't think of a single thing in the world. But when I'm relaxed, when I'm just out of my dream state, the ideas, theories just pop into my mind from nowhere. So I just really wonder that these people that class themselves as unintelligent are there is a certain heavy degree of parenting which has affected the levels of intelligence to them. And if you think about the neuroplasticity and the environmental effect, if you could think to yourself, right, imagine if you had a child and you literally just all that their schooling was 24/7 was soccer, nothing else. You would expect them to be fairly accomplished at soccer at some point just because of the full environment of what they lived in. Now, if another schooling was just to put a child into a library and say, okay, right, now read the National Library, that's all you're going to do now is just read the National Library, I'm sure they would come out pretty goddamn intelligent after a while in comparison to being just being told a curriculum. And imagine if they were all learning these things, they would just be teaching that things are based upon their own curiosity, their own inspiration, in comparison to what other people expected them to learn. So yeah, I'm just stroking and I'm misting and just shedding some sparks of light upon this intelligence theory. I find it a little bit strange when IQ seems to be just thrown into the mix and it's just the one overriding factor of what controls life and everything else. I know governments love that intelligent person that can come up with these business plans and ideas that can create more GDP. But if you look in the world and where the happiest people are in the world, they seem to be these islander people that live in fairly primitive lifestyles, but they go fishing, they spend lots of time with their family. When we scale them on the happiness factor, they smash apart the Americans, any other Western country, in comparison to what they have in level of happiness. And considering that happiness is our ultimate goal, really, how far has that intelligence got that person in the first place? It sometimes has created isolations, and people are less social beings. They've got less time to do things, all these kind of pursuits. And really, if you think, okay, well, the determining goal of this intelligence is happiness, pursuit of happiness, and it hasn't been accomplished, then what was the purpose? What is the main point of all of this intelligence in the first place? It does lead to questions. I know, obviously, I'm not saying that intelligence is the main reason why people are depressed. There's other things. There's oppression. There's exploitation. There's all these kind of... there's society. There's status that have just connected in and into the whole mix, which has really not pushed and revered intelligence as much as what it could be. Imagine if the newspapers or the celebrity magazines were full of entrepreneurs and inventors in comparison to people that were famous for being very attractive, or something they just had very, well, they would literally, that was directly attributable to their genetics. Now, yeah, so intelligence is a very murky thing, and I don't think even if you did start to categorize it purely on pattern recognition alone, that it would give us totally everything that we required in life. And as I mentioned with artificial intelligence as well, that the key thing to artificial intelligence eventually is that it will be able to accomplish a lot of the analytical things much quicker. It could do multiple processing and studying and acquiring information at rapid speeds, and potentially pattern recognition as well. However, the human side, the humanistic side of emotion and understanding, which is going to be AI's customer base eventually, is going to be the thing that is more wanting, and the AI will still have to pursue its virtue and how to be as humanistic as possible to achieve certain goals of being valuable in this world. So, yeah, I'll leave you with those thoughts about intelligence. I just want to just spread that one out there. It's not... If we really want to be happy, we should just be joining those little island nations who go fishing with their children and all sit around the fire and share these songs. They've got some kind of system which is working out for them, which is very pleasant. I guess there is a certain level of abundance which is occurring in this world in terms of their lifestyles. But yeah, we've got to question these things and ask ourselves of where intelligence leads us, and if intelligence is the whole motivational goal, then we've got to be really concerned of that. And I would always say that intelligence, as well as fame and fortune, should all be the byproducts of virtue. And if we can maintain the virtue element, ideally without the God element, then we really have the greatest chance of success in the way that we are happy and we can share happiness with our fellow man or lady. So, thank you very much for your time. I shall be back for more in the not too distant future. Anyway, speak again. And yeah, don't worry if you've got if you're lacking in terms of like how your qualifications have gone or how even your IQ test has gone, what really sets you apart is if some people could have that intelligence, but it's never really utilized, never really mastered. It's the hand that you've got and how you use it, which really counts. And you will have an immense advantage if they remain static and you can build. And I think intelligence is something that definitely can be built over time, which is another thing that never really gets mentioned too much. Okay, so thank you very much for your time, and I'll be back for more.